Halloween and the general start of the fall season mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If you're more spiritual, it symbolizes a transition from the warmer seasons of life to the colder seasons of death and reminds you of the eternal cycle. If you're a little kid, it's the candy times. If you're an alcoholic, it's the eggnog times. And if you're like me, an 18 to 35-year-old goblinoid horror movie fan, it's the time of the year where women come to your house dressed like this, and all of the worst movies in human history finally come back to streaming services. Horror movies are marketed towards teen boys on average, and that means two things: violence and boobies. And if that's the spirit of the season we're in, there's no better game to cover than Succubus, the spin-off / sequel to Madmind Studio's previous insane horror game, Agony. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, you've probably seen one or both of my videos on Agony. In fact, Agony was the third video I ever uploaded to this channel, and is my second most successful video of all time. I still stand by everything I said in that video, I think, but I've also gotten approximately 1,000 times better at making these reviews in the past 3 years or so I'm not sure if I would recommend you watch it. Instead, I'm going to cover some brief bullet points about Agony that are going to be necessary for putting Succubus into context later. First of all, Agony is at the very least an interesting game. If you're playing on a PC and you can get access to the unrated version, I would even go so far as to say that it's a good game. Agony's initial pitch was that it was going to be the wildest horror game ever made, and it definitely made a pretty good attempt at pushing what you were allowed to get away with putting in a video game. Agony features one of the most insane depictions of the hell dimension in any game ever, and an absurdly detailed game world full of weird secrets and all sorts of things to unlock. On its surface, it feels a little bit like a walking sim style horror game, but the general absurdity of the rest of its design kind of elevates it beyond that description. One of the best parts of Agony was a Succubus mode, a game mode where instead of playing as the original player character, you play as a succubus, which allowed you to access certain areas of the map you can't get to in a normal playthrough, and generally offered a more paradoxically relaxing playthrough of the game, and allowed you to generally explore the bonkers world Madmind has created. And that brings us to the game's spin-off sequel, Succubus, where you play as the succubus for the entire game, but also she's the Doom guy now. Succubus is marketed as an action horror game, which I guess is true. The premise is pretty simple. In Agony, the character called the Red Goddess, who was more or less in control of all of hell, wakes up the seven-headed beast from Revelations and goes off to do the apocalypse and live on Earth. This means hell has a good old-fashioned power vacuum, and every demon with an ego, which is all of them, are trying to take over the throne. Additionally, all the humans stuck in hell are now significantly less oppressed than they were when the goddess was in control, and are doing the exact thing that I said they would do in my Agony review, which is sharpen sticks, or in this case bones, and immediately start doing organized violence. The game still insists that humans are at the bottom of the food chain, but I assure you, this is only temporary. We came from an ancient African savanna, which is just about as close as you can possibly get to hell on Earth. Go look up videos of baboons eating their prey alive. We escaped the bottom of the food chain once, and we will do it again. The game also heavily implies that the reason that Avidya is such a big deal is because she's half human. So if we can't beat the demons, then we'll just fuck them out of existence, like we did to the Neanderthals. Humans are going to come out on top. The demon days are numbered. From the standpoint of a biblical or literary metaphor, there isn't really that much of a difference between humans and demons. Demons are just what you get when you amplify the absolute worst traits of humanity. And this is why the demons can't win. We are you. The calls are coming from inside the house. A wise man once said, "No, John, you are the demons." And while all of this is going on, the Succubus Vidya is trying to do hot girl shit in her fuck cave before having a mild disagreement with Baphomet, and now we have to spend 12 hours getting revenge. Right off the bat, we should probably get the elephant in the room out of the way. Succubus is basically just Doom with melee weapons and tits. You play through a series of levels to get to the end of the game. Each level has big hordes of enemies, you can do wacky glory kills with a system identical to the one used by Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, and occasionally you fight a big boss. It's a simple premise, and the game is not even remotely shy about just being the thing that it is. The first hurdle Succubus needed to clear was making first-person melee combat tolerable, which many games before it have failed to manage. In this case, how tolerable it is largely depends on which weapon you're using and personal preference. If you're using the sword, it's pretty boring. If you're using something like the hammer, which can ragdoll entire groups of enemies at the same time, or the staff, which is cartoonishly overpowered by every possible metric, it can be pretty fun. It can also be decently challenging depending on your difficulty. Of course, this is a smaller indie developer, so there's a good deal of weird jank and the game doesn't quite flow flawlessly, and you've got weird hang-ups like relatively obnoxious shield enemies and some semi-annoying things like the suicide bomb enemies, but in general, I think the combat is passable and the moment-to-moment gameplay definitely isn't boring. But it's also not anything even remotely new. Getting a little bit more into the weeds mechanically, you've also got certain abilities which are unlocked depending on what armor you're wearing. Armor, of course, being a very strong word to describe most of these designs. The abilities themselves don't really feel that well balanced. A lot of them feel a little too slow and clunky to be useful. You're gonna want to pick an armor with finger guns. The description has a couple typos in it, so it might be hard to spot, but finger guns are by far the game's best spell. There are some other ones like the Force Push, which can be useful in certain situations like trying to feed enemies to tentacles for the level's bonus goal, but generally, you're really going to want to lean into finger guns. These bonus goals will, of course, unlock many of the game's extras and cosmetics, which you can use in your quest to become the prettiest girl in hell, and are also one of the roadblocks that prevent you from 100% completing a level, which will give you this nice, golden, glowing outline on your map to give your completionist gibbon brain a dopamine hit. Weapons are unlocked either by finding them on an altar like this, or by buying them in your hub world with the souls that you get from enemies you kill throughout the game. Each weapon type has several weapons in its lineup, and for the most part, each one is just a direct linear upgrade from the previous one, which to me felt a little bit weird. Why wouldn't I just save up for a couple levels and buy the best weapon for each class? That seems easier than progressively upgrading. It probably would have been better to just have a weapon upgrade system or something here to give the player a little bit better of a sense of progression. And like I mentioned a minute ago, the general balance of these weapons is fucking insane. The staff is by far and away the best weapon in the game in terms of utility and damage, and once you get it, there's no real reason to use another weapon, unless you need to for some kind of bonus. I mean, you get it late enough in the game to where this was probably somewhat on purpose, but it's still wild. At first, I was using the hammer to clear shield enemies and stun lock the big boys, and then switching to the scythe for a bigger attack range and wider swings for taking out unarmored hordes, which felt like an actual strategy. But once I got the staff, it did both of those things at once, and strategy was no longer required beyond spinning stick go burr. But I do have to admit, the spinning stick is very fun. At this point in the video, you've probably noticed that a lot of things are censored. So while I've got you here, I should probably also explain how this game's censorship options work. If you watched my Agony video, or you remember anything about Agony's censorship controversy, you'll probably remember that the game struggled to avoid the dreaded AO rating, which is typically a death sentence for video games commercially. Eventually, they settled on being able to release Agony unrated as a separate version of the game, which caused all kinds of issues and was very difficult to get on console. In order to avoid this entire clown show, this time Madmind released Succubus censored by default, and you can download a free patch from their website to play the full, uncensored version with all of the boobies and the cut sex scenes that you could possibly imagine. Obviously, all of the footage you are seeing in this video is the censored version, because, let me tell you, manually censoring all that footage for the Agony video was the biggest pain in the ass. This pixel shader is a blessing. Also, I should probably draw attention to the fact, once again, that it's fucking insane to me that apparently the worst part about this imagery is the fact that you can see the guy's dick. I gotta be honest with you, I don't think the dick is the worst part about what is currently unfolding here. If Madmind's games convince you of anything, maybe it's that dicks and boobs probably aren't nearly as bad as we've been led to believe. Just based on the general insanity of Madmind's hell, the entertaining action gameplay, and the ridiculous fucking dialogue.
You dirty, cum-drowning slut! You've come so far, only to...
Yes, sounds like me.
I could probably recommend this game with a straight face to anyone who likes dumb, edgy bullshit, or, like, big fans of metal album covers or something. I'm just generally a fan of Madmind. They're getting wacky in a way that no other developer really is right now. But this, of course, wouldn't be a big, cynical YouTube review if I didn't go over some of my criticisms of the game, so let's get all that lame shit, like local politics, oil money, the Supreme Court, or whatever out of the way, and talk about what really makes the world go around, analyzing video games on the internet computer. My first and biggest criticism of Succubus is that the level design is several orders of magnitude less interesting and detailed than Agony. Agony is an extremely dense, psychedelic vision of hell that is ultra-violent, but also hypnotically pretty. It has a much more lush and vibrant depiction of hell than most games, which typically go for the old standbys of fire and brimstone, or spooky flesh maze, which Agony also has. Succubus, even though it takes place in the same hell and visits some of the same areas, is generally a more stereotypical hell that is a lot less detailed and a lot less interesting to look at. There are, of course, hints of cool shit, like in these forest levels, but it seems like it mostly rotates between fire and brimstone hell, bombed out cathedrals, and funny flesh walls. There are some very good reasons why you would want your game world to be a little bit more toned down in Succubus as opposed to Agony, though. Agony is very much a fish out of water horror game. You're playing a guy who just woke up in hell. Everything is loud, violent, and blurry, and the entire game feels like dropping acid and have someone blast a tuba over your head. The game world being dense, confusing, and claustrophobic makes sense. Succubus, on the other hand, is an action game, and in order for an action game to work, you need opened up arenas and clearly lit areas where you can see everything that's going on, otherwise you just be lost. Also, Madmind is currently working on 2 other games, and if I was a betting man, I would say that way more resources are being given to these 2 games than were given to Succubus, which was a goofy spin-off that already had an enormous amount of its assets finished, thanks to the fact that so many of Agony's assets could just be reused. But even though I get why the game's world is probably a little bit less detailed, I kind of wish a better balance could have been struck here. Succubus already copies so much from games like Doom, so why not go all out and have areas like this that are wide open arenas, and then more dense areas like this where you explore for collectibles or something. I know Madmind has more than enough skill to do this based on how absurdly detailed Agony is. The second criticism I have of Succubus is just sort of its general tone compared to Agony. Agony is a surprisingly self-serious game for how wild its depictions of sex and violence are. Agony is extremely edgy, but it's edgy for a reason. It asks the question, what if you went to actual wild-ass Catholic Renaissance painting hell? The hard-hitting, eternal torture, gnashing of teeth hell. What would that even look like? How could it even be comprehensible? So, of course the imagery in the game is intense. You're in hell. What did you expect? But the characters themselves are fairly normal. I mean, the demons are edgy, but that's their job. My point is, Agony plays itself pretty seriously, and that kind of lends it a certain credibility. By comparison, Succubus is silly as fuck. If I was going to draw any comparison at all, it would be that Agony is Evil Dead and Succubus is Army of Darkness. Now, to be clear, Army of Darkness is one of my favorite movies of all time, but I think Succubus might be shooting itself in the foot a little bit here. Most of the time, I felt like Agony was making a point, but most of the time in Succubus, I just sort of felt like the game was trying to be as edgy as possible for the sake of putting the most insane shit on screen they could and no other real reason. This part of the review is going to be the part that is probably the most subjective, though. There are a lot of people out there that prefer self-serious media, and a lot of people out there that prefer insane, irreverent titty media. And I don't know which one, if either, is more valid. Personally, I would have preferred a little bit more of a balance out of Succubus, though. I know that someone at Madmind is probably going to watch this, because these guys have supported me on Twitter. So if I was going to give any constructive criticism, it would be this. If Agony and Succubus are successful enough, and still fun enough to work on to justify a third game in this universe, if you guys can figure out a way to balance the detail and self-seriousness of Agony with the fast-paced gameplay and goofy antics of Succubus, I think you will have a masterpiece of game design and world building on your hands. At the end of the day, I really enjoyed Agony and Succubus, and I'm very much looking forward to what Madmind does next. Paranoid looks like it's going to be fucking incredible, and I don't know what Tormentor is, but the fact that you guys are labeling this one as extreme horror and not the other ones has me profusely sweating. How is Agony not extreme horror? What are you psychos doing over there? If you want to see more videos like this one, consider subscribing. If you're already subscribed and want more ways to support the channel, the best thing you can do is head over to patreon.com/ProbablyJacob, where you can subscribe for as little as $2 a month for exclusive podcast content. If you want to listen to free episodes of the podcast, you can find it wherever podcasts are, and as always, you can find links in the description to my active Discord channel, my Twitch channel, where I try to stream at least once a week, and finally, you should follow me on Twitter so you don't miss any important Dune shit posts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.